The hallways of St. Mary's Hospital in New York City have always been synonymous with rush and noise. But that night, the silence seemed to weigh more heavily than any scream. At the end of the hallway, a 9-year-old black boy, Noah Bennett, stopped before the locked door marked with a metal number, Room 6. His teary eyes did not blink, fixed as if that door hid something that only he could feel. The nurses tried to push him away, believing it was just a childish fantasy. But Noah wouldn't move. His hands trembled, his breath came in shallow gasps, and each time he repeated weakly, "Room 6, Room 6." The air seemed to grow thicker, suffocating, as if the hospital itself were reacting to those words. Doctors, visitors, and staff exchanged awkward glances. The door had been closed for over 10 years. No one knew for sure why, only that it was a forgotten, or rather, avoided space. There was something there everyone preferred not to mention. As Noah stood still, it seemed time also stopped. People passing through the hallway slowed, uneasiness building. There was not only fear in their eyes, but the certainty that invisible echoes were demanding to be heard behind those cold walls. The discomfort grew, as if the boy's presence were a trigger for memories the hospital wished to keep buried. He was no longer just a child at a door. It was the beginning of something no one could contain. But what exactly did Noah know? And why, after so many years of silence, Room 6 finally seemed about to reveal his secret? If you enjoy exciting and mysterious stories, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support future stories. St. Mary's Hospital, nestled in the heart of New York City, has always held the reputation of being one of the oldest and most respected in the city. Its wide, cold walls have witnessed countless stories of life and death, but they also held secrets the hallways preferred to keep secret. For the doctors and nurses who worked there, the routine was marked by the rush of care and the need to ignore what they could not explain. And so, when Noah Bennett began obsessively repeating the number of a sealed room, most preferred to look away, dismissing it as the whim of a traumatized child. A Dr. Collins, a pediatrician known for her patience, initially tried to take the boy in. She believed his behavior might simply be a consequence of stress after a hospitalization. However, as the days passed, she realized there was something deeper to his fixation. Noah wasn't distracted by toys. He didn't ask for different foods. He didn't cry to leave. All he did was look toward the end of the hallway and repeat the same call, as if trying to alert the adults around him. The nurses, accustomed to childhood delusions and phobias, tried to downplay the situation. Some murmured among themselves that he'd probably heard some old story told by older staff. Others believed it was a more serious psychological condition. But despite their excuses, none of them had the courage to approach the door marked with the number 6. The simple act of passing through was uncomfortable, as if the atmosphere in the hallway grew heavier with each step taken in that direction. For visitors, the scene also had an impact. Many stopped for a few seconds, observing the child, and then walked away with an involuntary shiver. It was impossible not to notice the seriousness of his expression, the way he seemed to carry a truth that didn't belong to a boy of just 9. Yet amidst their attempts to rationalize Noah's behavior, a silent doubt grew among the few who still dared to look him in the eye. What if it wasn't just their imagination? What if the child really knew something everyone else insisted on denying? Because if there was something hidden in that forgotten room, Noah's insistence would soon show that the secret could not remain hidden for much longer. The following days only confirmed what many tried to deny. Noah Bennett didn't just repeat Room 6 in the hallway. His behavior began to manifest itself in other forms, always imbued with a disturbing precision. During routine checkups, when he was given sheets of paper to draw, he never sketched landscapes, people, or anything childish. In the center of the sheet, with firm, almost obsessive strokes, he drew the number 6, sometimes outlined in circles, sometimes alone, always large, always central. Nurses kept some of these drawings secret, impressed by the intensity with which the child had scratched the graphite, as if he were recording a warning rather than playing. At night, when the lights dimmed in the hallways and the hospital fell into a dense silence, Noah couldn't sleep. Surveillance cameras showed his small silhouette sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes open, staring into space. At times, his lips would move in almost imperceptible whispers, repeating the same word. It wasn't hysterical crying, not desperate screams. It was the repetition of someone who seemed convinced of a truth. Room 6, room 6, room 6. In one of the incidents that most frightened the staff, Noah was found the next morning with his index finger covered in white dust. When questioned, he didn't respond. But when they looked at the foggy bedroom window, the number 6 was once again etched on the glass, as if a reminder that this call would never be interrupted. Some nurses began to avoid getting too close. They whispered that the child seemed to see things no one else could. One of them, more sensitive, swore she felt a cold shiver as she grabbed the boy's arm to guide him back to bed. He didn't struggle, didn't make a fuss. He just stared down the hallway as if he'd left something important behind. Doctors insisted on rational diagnoses, trauma, stress, even signs of childhood obsessive-compulsive disorder. But nothing explained Noah's look. It wasn't delusion, it wasn't fantasy. There was a conviction too deep for a child to invent. With each repetition, it seemed less like fear and more like a warning. And it was precisely this insistence that began to bother not only the staff, but also visitors and patients. The whisper echoed through the hallways, almost as if it had a life of its own. This child wasn't just talking about a room. She was pointing to a buried truth, something everyone pretended didn't exist, but which continued to throb behind the closed door. The problem was that the entire hospital was about to realize that ignoring that warning would no longer be possible. Because if Noah wouldn't stop repeating it, it was because the secret no longer wanted to remain silent. But what exactly was he trying to get out of there? The hallways of St. Mary's began to change. What had once been a routine, marked by the clinking of trays and the constant beeping of heart monitors, began to be punctuated by signals no one could explain. The feeling of unease became more prevalent, and strangely, it was always associated with the presence of Noah Bennett. It all started subtly. Lights flickered only when he passed through certain hallways. The cold intensified near the door to room 6, enough to make nurses' skin crawl even in the middle of a New York summer. On one shift, the maintenance technician swore the air conditioning temperature had suddenly dropped, but the controls registered no change. The metallic smell also appeared, thick and unsettling. It wasn't the usual aroma of hospital. Disinfectants, but something heavier like rusted iron or stagnant blood. It was often accompanied by a distant hum, as if an echo reverberated behind the walls. And strange as it was, Noah seemed to be the only one not surprised. When questioned, he simply murmured, without taking his eyes off the door, "It's coming from there." The internal cameras, which until then had recorded normal movements, began to capture unexplained noises. In nighttime recordings, some security guards reported hearing footsteps echoing down the hallway of room 6, even when no one was there. A nurse swore she saw a shadow quickly cross the wall near the door. The report was hushed up by hospital management, but the rumor spread like wildfire among staff. And Noah, ever calm in his strange repetition, seemed to be connected to each of these manifestations. One night, a patient's heart monitor went dead. Doctors rushed to revive him, but no one noticed that, at the same moment, Noah was sitting up in bed, eyes glazed, whispering, "He's still there." When the equipment returned to normal, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, except Noah, who simply lowered his head as if already knowing it wasn't the end. Some doctors tried to justify it with technical flaws, coincidences, or psychological suggestion, but the repetition of events, always linked to the same place, made it impossible to deny. Something was manifesting there, something that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The signs were no longer mere coincidences. They were growing, gaining strength, and it seemed the entire hospital was about to be drawn into a secret, kept for over a decade. And it was just when everyone started trying to ignore it once again that the first attempt at investigation happened. It was on a Friday night that the discomfort reached its peak. The hospital was quieter than usual, with only a few nurses patrolling the hallways. Noah, as usual, remained restless, staring at the door to room 6. The security guard in charge of the shift, Officer Miller, had already heard the rumors from the employees and, tired of seeing the climate of fear increase, decided to put an end to it once and for all. Miller wasn't a man to believe in superstition. A former police officer, accustomed to the harshness of the streets, he believed only in what he could see and touch. As he approached the door, he wore an impatient expression, as if intent on proving there was nothing to fear. Nurses tried to dissuade him, claiming there was no need to disturb a disused room, but Miller laughed and said loudly for all to hear, "It's just a dusty old room. This child needs to stop playing with your imagination." With the master key in hand, he turned the lock. The metallic sound echoed through the hallway, as if louder than it actually was. The door creaked slowly, opening to reveal a dark, dusty, silent room. Outside, employees approached, curious and wary, trying to see what was inside. Miller entered with firm steps, shining his flashlight in all directions. The room looked empty, peeling walls, an old bed propped up in the corner, and a few pieces of furniture covered in white sheets. Nothing more than what one would expect from a space abandoned for years. The security guard smiled arrogantly, turned to the others and said, "See? Nothing but dust." He closed the door behind him and returned to his station as if he had proven his point. However, at that very moment, Noah began to tremble silently. His eyes filled with tears, and he brought his hands to his face, stifling a suppressed sob. Nurses rushed to his aid, but the boy only murmured, his voice broken, "He's still there. He's still there." The boy's reaction chilled everyone in the hallway. There was no screaming, no hysteria, just a cold certainty, spoken in a tone that seemed truer than any rational explanation. Miller himself, though he didn't show it, began to avoid the area around room 6 after that night. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but everyone sensed that the door hid something beyond what met the eye. Noah's silence wasn't empty. It was a warning, and the confirmation would come sooner than anyone imagined, on a night when the hospital would be plunged into darkness, and the impossible would be revealed before everyone. The following morning, St. Mary's seemed enveloped in an even heavier atmosphere. The hospital operated at a reduced pace, with only the most critically ill patients, and the staff on duty, Noah Bennett, sitting on his bed staring out into the hallway, seemed to be waiting for something. He wasn't crying, he wasn't asking for anything. He simply waited, as if he knew a change was approaching. Shortly after midnight, the lights began to flicker. First, a rapid flicker, then a sudden drop that plunged the entire floor into darkness. Equipment alarms went off. Nurses rushed to check on patients, and the sound of heart monitors mingled with the suppressed panic. Amidst the chaos, one detail went unnoticed by most. The door to room 6, previously locked, began to creak on its own. That metallic sound echoed like a muffled scream through the hallways. Some employees froze in place, unable to move, while others swore they felt a chilly wind brush against their skin. The prolonged creaking ended with the door slowly opening, revealing only the absolute darkness of the room. Noah got out of bed without anyone being able to stop him. His bare feet touched the cold floor, and he walked silently to the end of the hallway. The nurses tried to call him, but it was as if he were in a trance. When he stopped in front of the half-open door, he took out a small piece of white chalk he had hidden in his pocket. No one knew where he had found it. He squatted down and wrote on the floor, in shaky but clear letters, "Frozen in time." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Everyone present stared at the words written on the floor, unsure of their meaning. The temperature plummeted even further, and the air seemed to become thick, difficult to breathe. A security guard's flashlight illuminated the room, but the light was dim, as if absorbed by the shadows. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed, as if something had fallen inside the room. A musty, rusty smell filled the hallway. Officer Miller, who had been so skeptical before, paled when he saw that the dust marks on the floor looked disturbed, as if someone had walked there recently. But no one had entered this room for 15 years. People began to back away, but Noah remained still, his breathing slow and his eyes fixed. His expression wasn't one of fear, but of someone who already knew what others didn't yet understand. This wasn't just an abandoned room. It was a place trapped in time, filled with something that still lived on, even after so many years. A younger nurse tried to pull the boy away, but he resisted gently, without violence, and only repeated hoarsely, "He never left." Here, the sentence fell like a blow to the hearts of all who heard it. It was at that moment that collective perception shifted. It was no longer possible to laugh, deny, or justify. Something real was unfolding behind that door, something that couldn't be explained by coincidence or electrical faults. The entire hospital was beginning to understand that Noah's obsession wasn't delusional. It was an urgent warning. And while the door remained open, opening wide the darkness, a new dilemma arose. Who would have the courage to enter and discover what was really hidden inside? After that early morning, there was no longer any way to keep quiet about the events. The entire hospital seemed to be filled with the tension of something that finally demanded to be revealed. The board, pressured by employees who refused to continue working night shifts, decided to call an emergency meeting. Noah Bennett's case could no longer be treated as a simple childish act. There were concrete facts, witnesses and records that pointed to something much bigger. The local police were called. 2 investigators, Detective Mark Sullivan and his partner, Angela Ruiz, took it upon themselves to analyze what was happening. Sullivan, a pragmatic man skeptical of any supernatural explanation, believed that all the mass hysteria could be the result of a secret being covered up by the hospital. Ruiz, more sensitive and attentive to detail, observed Noah with special care. She realized that this was no ordinary boy. There was a strange depth in his gaze, as if he were carrying a memory that wasn't his own. The first step was to review the hospital's files. In a dusty room, old boxes of documents were reopened. Among medical records and administrative reports, they found records that room 6 had been deactivated 15 years ago after a series of complaints that were never properly investigated. The name that repeatedly came up was that of Dr. Raymond Clark, a doctor who, according to documents, had worked briefly at the hospital and disappeared without a trace. As Sullivan leafed through the papers, Ruiz noticed inconsistencies. Dates were doctored, reports were incomplete, signatures seemed forced. Everything indicated someone had tried to cover up something dark. In conversations with older employees, they discovered fragments of reports about unexplained disappearances and medical procedures never authorized. But everyone spoke in hushed tones, as if they still feared the consequences. Back at the hospital, tension was mounting. Noah was taken to the observation room to stay away from the commotion, but he kept his eyes fixed on room 6. His body seemed to react to every mention of Clark's name, as if silently confirming that this was the missing link to understanding the enigma. Detectives and police officers decided to inspect the room more thoroughly. Wearing masks and powerful flashlights, they entered the sealed space. The smell was unbearable, a mixture of mold and ingrained rust. The walls displayed dark stains that looked like old leaks, but some resembled claw marks dragged against the concrete. The silence inside was oppressive, as if the air were heavier than anywhere else in the hospital. During the search, Sullivan found a barely visible crack in the floor, covered in accumulated dust. As he removed the fragments, he realized something was hidden beneath the brittle boards. With the help of police officers, they removed the damaged section and revealed an aged metal box locked with a padlock already corroded by time. It was Noah who, when discreetly brought to the scene, simply pointed to the box without saying anything. He didn't need to speak. Everyone knew that was the next step in unraveling the mystery. But what could be inside an object sealed and forgotten for so many years? The metal box was covered in a crust of rust and dust, as if it had been condemned to oblivion along with room 6 itself. The metallic sound of the padlock being forced echoed through the empty space, and everyone present felt the strange sensation that they were violating not only an object, but also a secret carefully buried in time. Detective Sullivan, with the help of a crowbar, finally managed to break the weakened lock. As the lid creaked open, a sickly, sweet smell escaped, mixed with the scent of aged papers and rotting fabrics. Inside the box were seemingly mundane objects that carried symbolic weight, an old stethoscope still. Stained in places, a notebook with pages scribbled in nearly illegible handwriting, and at the bottom, a small, clear plastic case containing a cassette tape. It was this tape that caught everyone's attention. There was no label, no date, just a magnetic reel that seemed to have been kept with the intention of one day being found. Dr. Collins, who had been watching the scene in silence, almost recoiled when she saw the tape. The expression on her face was that of someone recognizing an unseen danger. "We shouldn't be listening to this here," she murmured, but her voice was drowned out by Sullivan's insistence, who believed this might be the missing link in the investigation. Noah remained motionless, just watching. His teary eyes never left the tape. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, but the gleam in his eyes seemed to confirm that this was part of what he'd been trying to convey all along. As if the tape were proof he'd never been wrong. An old tape recorder was provided. As the tape began to play, a staticky hiss filled the air, and soon a male voice echoed, low and firm. "They'll never find me in here. Time is my greatest ally." It was the voice of someone speaking with sick confidence, perhaps even pride. The recording continued with disjointed passages, mixing medical instructions and enigmatic phrases, but the repetition of a single expression made everyone uneasy. "Keep it frozen, keep it frozen." Everyone's heart raced. There was no denying it. The tape belonged to Dr. Raymond Clark. He knew what was inside that room and had left his mark there, as if he wanted to defy the future. Noah closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time, took a step back. It wasn't fear. It was acceptance that the truth was about to unfold before them. But what exactly did "keep frozen" mean? What had been kept secret, trapped in time, waiting to be revealed? The cassette tape had opened a wound, but it wasn't enough to explain the darkness that hung over room 6. Determined to discover what had truly been kept frozen, the investigators returned to the scene with more advanced equipment. Spotlights were positioned, cameras recorded every detail, and a forensic team began inspecting every corner. The air seemed heavier by the minute, as if the room itself resisted being revealed. While the experts were banging on the walls, searching for hidden compartments, Detective Ruiz found something strange near the headboard of the old bed. The upholstery was slightly shifted, as if it had been disturbed in the past. Using tools, they managed to loosen the metal structure, revealing an opening that led to a sort of secret compartment. The makeshift hallway smelled of rot and damp cold, as if the space had been isolated for decades. Traversing the narrow path, they reached a hidden chamber. Inside, the scene was spine-chilling. There were rusted gurneys, rust-covered surgical instruments, and broken vials scattered across the floor. But what truly transfixed everyone was what stood in the center of the room. Bodies preserved in makeshift ice blocks, now nearly melted, but still recognizable. They were patients, men, women, and even a child, kept in a grotesque state of preservation. Silence fell over the group. No words could describe the horror of it all. The victims had marks on their arms, signs of continuous sedation, and in some cases, scars from experimental procedures. Clark wasn't just a fake doctor. He was a predator who had used the hospital as a front for his sick experiments. The shock was so great that some of those present recoiled immediately, clapping their hands over their mouths to stifle vomit. Others wept silently. Dr. Collins, in disbelief, let out a shaky whisper. My God, they were alive when he started. The evidence was overwhelming. Room 6 had not been deactivated by accident. It had been transformed into a clandestine laboratory where lives were frozen in time to satisfy Raymond Clark's sick mind. The tape recording now made perfect sense. Keep it frozen was not a metaphor. It was a literal order, a command to keep victims trapped between life and death, preserved as trophies of his insanity. Noah Bennett, who'd been watching in silence until then, entered the room without hesitation. He slowly approached one of the ice blocks, where a female body lay partially preserved. His small fingers touched the cold, cracked glass, and tears streamed down his face. He said nothing, but in that gesture everyone understood. He had always known someone was still there, asking to be found. The weight of that revelation echoed throughout the hospital. There was no hiding it. It was a scene that carried not only horror, but also confirmation that a gigantic crime had been buried in time. And yet, the question hanging in the air was even more disturbing. If Clark had disappeared all those years ago, where was he now? The discovery in room 6 spread like wildfire. There was no longer any way to remain silent about it. Police cordoned off the floor, journalists surrounded the hospital entrance, and the name of Dr. Raymond Clark returned to headlines forgotten almost 2 decades ago. Photos of the frozen bodies circulated among investigators, prosecutors, and experts, all trying to understand how something so monstrous could have been kept secret for so long. Clark, believed by many to be dead, was finally located in a remote suburb, living under a false identity. His arrest brought momentary relief among staff, but soon the sense of justice began to fade. The initial hearings revealed a tangle of missing documents, doctored records, and the clear intent that people far above him had benefited from his silence. The scandal was not just about a sick man, but about an entire system that chose to ignore signals in the name of the hospital's reputation. Meanwhile, St. Mary's was plunged into a state of mourning. Once bustling corridors now seemed somber, as if the very fabric of the building absorbed the weight of the revealed secret. Some patients were transferred, doctors resigned, and nurses refused to continue working. The stain on the hospital's history could not be erased. Noah Bennett remained silent. Even after Clark's arrest, he seemed neither satisfied nor vengeful. He simply watched the commotion with the expression of someone who already knew that nothing would restore the lives that had been lost. For him, justice served by the courts was not enough. The chief's boy's gaze reflected something deeper, the certainty that the truth had been pulled from the shadows, but that the price of that enduring silence would never be fully paid. The trial dragged on for months, but among the halls of St. Mary's, what lingered was not a sense of victory. It was the suffocating doubt of how many others knew, how many would still choose to remain silent. The hospital promised reforms, announced new safety protocols, and even changed management. But among the survivors of the scandal, one certainty lingered. Some wounds don't heal, they just remain open, reminding everyone of what happened. And so, even with the arrest of the person responsible, the question became inevitable. Was Room 6 finally silent, or would the secrets it held still find a way to manifest themselves? The days following Clark's arrest were thickly silent at St. Mary's. Once vibrant hallways became shadowy, and every footstep echoed as a reminder of the horror revealed. Among the transferred patients and staff members who requested leave, few remained. But among those who still circulated the hospital, no one failed to notice the discreet figure of Noah Bennett. The boy who had brought a buried secret to light walked unhurriedly, always towards the same destination, the door to Room 6. On that grey morning, the hospital seemed emptier than ever. The sun streamed through the windows in pale beams, but nothing illuminated the chill that still hung over the 6th floor. Noah stopped before the door, now sealed by police order. The wood was marked with yellow tape, a clear warning that this space remained forbidden territory. But for the boy, no prohibition could keep him away. He remained there, in absolute silence, as if waiting for something on the other side to still respond. With slow movements, Noah knelt on the cold floor, and with a piece of charcoal he carried in his pocket, began to draw. It wasn't the number 6 this time. He carefully traced a circle and, within it, he drew a straight line that crossed it, dividing it into 2 halves. The gesture was firm, almost solemn, as if it had been rehearsed many times in his mind. When he finished, he took a few steps back and contemplated the symbol. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on his lips. It wasn't joy, nor triumph. It was an enigmatic smile, laden with a meaning no one around could comprehend. Some nurses watching from a distance exchanged confused glances, unable to interpret that mysterious pattern. The boy didn't explain. There were no words. He simply stared at the symbol as if closing a cycle, as if leaving a message that doesn't need to be understood immediately, but carries within it an even greater truth. And in that instant, everyone watching him felt the same uneasiness. Noah at St. Mary's was never the same after that series of revelations. The walls, which once held only ordinary stories of pain and hope, now bore the weight of a secret exposed to the world. Nurses, doctors, and even visitors knew they would never forget the boy who silently pointed to the truth no one had the courage to face. Noah Bennett unwittingly became the connecting thread between the hidden past and the revelation that shook the entire town. On that last day, before the sealed door of Room 6, he left more than a drawing on the floor. He left a symbol that seemed to sum up all the pain, all the mystery, and all the strange connection he had with the place. He didn't explain, he didn't justify. He simply delivered that gesture as if it were a mark, a warning for the future. The circle, intersected by a straight line, divided glances and interpretations, but everyone who saw it sensed that nothing about it was random. Noah's faint smile, after so many tears and nights of whispering, didn't convey relief. It was the smile of someone who understood truths others never would. Perhaps he knew that human justice would never be enough to erase what happened there. Perhaps he understood that some ghosts cannot be buried by the law, What remained was a cold certainty. His silence had always been the loudest message, and when he finally walked away, leaving behind the drawing and the forever-marked door, the same feeling hung over everyone. The story seemed to have come to an end, but something in the atmosphere said otherwise. Noah had closed a cycle, but he had also planted a doubt that would continue to grow in every heart. What else was trapped in time, waiting to be revealed? In the following days, the hallways of St. Mary's became different. The air seemed heavier, footsteps more measured, and even the sound of hospital equipment seemed to echo strangely. Many healthcare professionals avoided passing near room 6, as if simply being near that door was enough to awaken memories everyone preferred to keep silent. The hospital, once a haven of healing, had transformed into a place where the invisible blended with the everyday, as if the past had taken deep root in that building. Some patients, in whispered conversations, claimed to sense presences at night, figures passing in front of the closed door, or muffled sounds coming from inside, even though they knew no one was there. Others claimed to dream of symbols similar to the one Noah had drawn, as if his mark had spread throughout the collective minds of everyone who entered the hospital. The town, which had once viewed St. Mary's as a pillar of trust, now regarded it with suspicion, almost fear, as if the place carried a hidden curse. Noah, for his part, never explained anything further. He returned to his silent routine, carrying in his eyes a maturity that belied his age. Many believed he had been merely a conduit, an unwitting messenger of something larger and darker, incapable of being translated into words. His gesture in front of room 6 had become a landmark, almost an urban legend, commented on in waiting lines, in stuffy hallways, and even in the local newspapers. His drawing remained etched not only on the floor, but in everyone's memory. Some swore that when passing through that hallway at night, they could see the circle and line glowing as if made of their own light. Others claimed that if they remained silent, they could hear a distant echo, like the whispers of voices trapped behind the door. No rational explanation could contain the weight of what everyone felt, and most disturbing was the conviction that Noah, at just 9 years old, had always known more than he let on. Little by little, the hospital began losing doctors and staff. Many requested transfers, citing burnout or life changes, but the truth is that fear had taken over. What began as a child's silence became a collective enigma, an open wound no one dared touch. And yet, there were always those most curious, those who believed the secret of room 6 had not yet been fully revealed. The circle drawn on the floor became the subject of debate, interpretation, and even study by people interested in unexplained phenomena. For some, it was a symbol of protection, as if Noah had sealed the room against something threatening to escape. For others, it was exactly the opposite, a call, an opening to something that remained locked away, but yearned to break through the walls of time. Deep down, no one knew the truth. What everyone was certain of was that the hospital would never be the same again. The stories, rumors, and fearful looks were now part of the routine, a constant reminder that some doors shouldn't be opened, but they also can't be ignored. And as the city tried to move on, Noah remained silent, watching with that same gaze that had once stopped before room 6 and made the world slow down. Maybe he had finished his role in that story, maybe not. But the feeling of uncertainty lingered, like a shadow that never lifts. What else did Noah know? And what was really hiding behind the door of room 6, patiently waiting for the right moment? To resurface, he never spoke, but he always knew. If this story touched you and kept you hooked until the very last second, subscribe to the channel now. Activate the bell, like, and share, because many more hidden, disturbing, and moving stories are yet to come, and each one may reveal truths few have the courage to face.